Hello, and welcome to Beyond the Limb, where we explore physical therapy evidence, expertise, and innovation in limb loss and limb difference care. I'm your host, Will Riddick, and I'm a physical therapist focused on improving care for patients with limb loss and limb difference. In today's episode, we're discussing online communities within limb loss and limb difference practice. Over the past several years, we've seen the growing role that digital networking and professional communities can play in advancing specialty practice areas. Whether through social media groups, professional forums, or organized association platforms, these spaces can help bring together clinicians from across the country and even around the world who are passionate about improving outcomes for individuals with limb loss and limb difference. Today's guest has been instrumental in helping create and expand those opportunities. My guest today is Toran MacLeod. Toran is a professor in the Department of Physical Therapy at California State University, or CSU, Sacramento, with research interest founded within a musculoskeletal clinical perspective. He's regularly worked as a physical therapist since graduating from CSU, Sacramento, and as a clinician scientist, he examines the relationships between biomechanics, tissue morphology, and clinical metrics of function. Toran is at the forefront of advocating and advancing limb loss and limb difference care through multiple initiatives. He's active in the American Physical Therapy Association, notably in the APTA Acute Care Amputation and Limb Differences Focus Group, where he has played a key role in developing amputation and limb difference curricular guidelines, leading the focus group's online presence, and most recently setting up a new APTA community in limb loss and limb difference. Toran, thanks for being here.
It's great to see you. Great to be here.
Well, let's go ahead and get started. Tell me a little bit about your background. Kind of how did you come into limb loss, limb difference? I know you kind of have a little bit of varied background.
Yeah, for sure. So when I took prosthetics in PT school, I took it from Bella May, which some folks might recognize that name. She wrote a textbook on the content. It was sort of back from like Georgia, like from the very get-go. She was FAPTA, so she's an incredible resource in this area. But we found her to be challenging to understand. No, she had a very, very thick German accent. If you've never met her. And then her teaching was really case-based, as her textbook indicates, and wasn't really in the prosthetic biomechanics, which the NPTE really focused on in their questions. So she would sort of wrap up. It was like the end of a Friday afternoon at 3 or 4 p.m. kind of thing in this very, very hot room. And then I would take to the chalkboard and start describing like the prosthetics biomechanics. And because I had done a master's in biomechanics prior to going to PT school. So the torques and moments and et cetera, that was very intuitive to me. It made sense, but I didn't see it as my next step in career, because I was very focused in really ACL biomechanics. And so I left after a very short period of time of clinical care in Sacramento. I left and went to Delaware for a PhD in biomechanics, really neuromuscular control, about the knee, motor control. ACL was the population. And then from there, I went on and was really focused on more neuroscience, brain control, and tissue morphology, MQIR, the quantitative imaging group at UCSF. And there, down the hall, was the prosthetics lab at the Orthopedics Institute, and I was helping to support biomechanics research and the osteoarthritic population. And the NEOA was a large RO1 study. And so somebody, a prosthetist, came and asked if I could help do his residency data collection. And all of a sudden I was like, oh wait, this stuff's really cool. Like I really enjoy this. And so we were doing like walking and running labs, and then we did a walking and running lab for a community. And then, Bob Gailey kind of returned back into my life and some of that work. And the just everybody I met was like so cool, like just really like it was a great community. And not to say that ACL neuroscience, I'm not like throwing shade on that. They were like cool people too. It's just I was like, wow, this is a really cool like new area. And then when I interviewed for the position at Sac State, they needed somebody to sort of take over for Bella. She I think she was 90 something at the time. So
Wow.
it made sense. Like I was like, okay, to take over. And so then I just really needed to get up to speed with that. So I guess the shortest I can make that story go for how I came into this area.
Yeah, it's interesting kind of hearing your background. That kind of makes sense actually understanding some of the work that you've done kind of in that time since, I feel like. Even notably, I think in terms of like being able to communicate with students,
Mm.
some of the work that you've done towards curricular guidelines. I mean, yeah, I kind of hear a little bit of that background in there. I'm curious, did you feel like the stepping into that role, I mean, like I said, it kind of blended in with some of your work. Like, as I mentioned, like curricular guidelines. Was that like an extension of the work that you did stepping into that role?
Actually, so I'm glad you reminded me. So I got to Sac State and I was teaching in content areas that made sense, like biomechanics, neuroscience, and um, evidence-based practice. But all that the stuff that made sense, like I was like, oh, okay, I know about this stuff. And then when I got to prosthetics, I was like, okay, great. So I see all these curricular guidelines out there, but there's nothing for prosthetics. And like, what should I teach? So I went to CAPTI and tried to figure out what they were doing and what their sort of guidelines were. Like what's balance, what's needed, as well as what is expected for what should be taught. And so I that went down a whole rabbit hole. I'm on a CAPTI panel now. I was a CAPTI reviewer. Like that, all that stuff is really to kind of, I mean, don't tell them that, but it's really kind of to push the bar to include more in prosthetic content. But maybe they'll hear us. I don't know. But when I went to see, what should be taught, what the expectations are in prosthetics, there was nothing. It was. So I did a study. I did a national survey of all the people that teach this content. Like, what do you teach? And in doing so, and that was like 2015 or so. That was 10 years ago. And then that led into just meeting like a more amazing people and developing a curricular guideline. Really seeing some large holes and just how different things are across the country. Everything from like 1 hour of content to a full like 3 or 4 unit course. So and everything in between. So that's how the curricular guidelines got developed.
Nice. Yeah, I don't know. I actually didn't know some of that history there. So, I'm curious. So at least the guidelines were sort of published under the amputation and limb differences focus group within the acute care section. Kind of tell me a little bit about your role in that, and even how that group played a role in that process.
So to be a legitimate, so this is something I learned, is to be a legitimate curricular guideline, you need to, it's almost like a Delphi, like you need to have some legitimacy. So to be valid, you have to have a variety of experts. And you can't sort of, pick the folks that you want to guide that curricular guideline. So to get at that legitimacy, I needed to have an academy to sponsor something through APTA and we're doing this again, by the way. So look that's up and posted for December for a revision on that. So welcome, join up. And so the focus group helped with that. I started the focus group to build community. So when I saw the results of the national survey, and I was like, wow, this is all over the place. We need to have some more focused conversations, content, and purpose. And so if folks are getting content at CSM or elsewhere, that need to have community for community, helping patient care, advocating for research and integration for research, particularly in this population, and then professional services. So the research example, for example, is that there are so many, there's like 1 or 2 RCTs. There just really aren't very many RCTs, including PT interventions. And so that is really limited because of it's hard to sample. So your population is spread across the United States. So how do you get around that? You do multi-centers. How do you do multi-centers? You need community. So, okay, so let's build a community so that then we can have integration and sample across multiple PIs and really get those data. But the first step in that was just sort of developing a focus group, and we might get back to this, but the focus group was really an attempt to get across all APTA and even outside of APTA. So my initial vision for the APTA was prosthetists, physiatrists, et cetera, social, like having a variety of different clinicians. The APTA is limited in that in some ways. And so a focus group, by definition, I had to learn all about the APTA bureaucracy. A focus group isn't limited by a particular academy. And whereas a special interest group is. So if you're in a SIG, you can only get access to that if you join that academy. And really, if you're an individual working with this population, you're probably a member of most academies, because whether it's sports or ortho or whatever, you're going to be seeing individuals for a variety of reasons. So the focus group was really instrumental in sort of bringing attention and building community.
How did those kind of early days go? I mean, in terms of like developing network and essentially your marketing of a sort,
Sure.
trying to bring people into that group. What did those early efforts look like? How did those connections happen?
So I was walking at the convention center in San Jose across the floor, and I saw Sharon Gorman, who was the president of the Academy of Acute Care at the time. And I said, hey, I'm interested in developing some curricular guidelines, and what do you think? And I'd like to maybe develop some sort of group that could be open to everybody, and that sort of snowball that sort of gathered all that. So it was kind of already having some connections, and that just I've been very fortunate with my training. The people who have trained me along the way say, "Oh wow, you're very well trained," and I'm not sure exactly how to take that. But my academic accolades, like I have been very, very well trained academically, and that a lot of that is community, is just knowing the right person to talk to make something happen. Like a nominating committee is frequently those people who just know everybody, and it's just very, very helpful to just have a lot of contacts. And the focus group, initially it started. There really was no community capacity within APTA. The new communities pages, those are brand new. So the Facebook became really the only option. And that was really a conversation with the community. Do you want to do LinkedIn? I still have a LinkedIn page for this group, but this is not active. It's people will pop in there and I'll say, hey, come join over here, because that's where everybody's active.
Yeah. So kind of like funneling them to more active sites overall. Yeah.
Yes.
I do want to echo. I think there's so much value in bringing people together into groups such as the focus group and bringing those connections. I'm just kind of reminded. I've heard many times that there are regional differences in practice. I've actually seen it too. It's like clinicians coming from different regions, they have almost like different styles of practice, I think, which are very heavily influenced by, maybe some of the like lecturers at different universities that are within the region. For example, you may have a different approach in Florida than you may have in Colorado, or there's things. So I think that does things like that. It points to this idea to bring together that community, to establish guidelines, like you said, and to I think centralize practice and optimize practice. I think ultimately, I think is the kind of the goal, I think, with that. Yeah. So in terms of, let's kind of dive into this idea of really the work that you said Facebook has kind of been sort of like a real strong anchor in terms of the group and developing those communications. What does that community look like on Facebook?
It is made up of, so initially it was really like a screening process to ask for APTA numbers and some screening questions to try to get at, and I've tried to really limit it to clinicians, and that may or may not have limb difference, and but not to patients, as it's really not that conversation. And I don't know where we're at, whether it's somewhere between 300 and 500 people, something like that. And I'm certainly the most active. And this I'll tell you, this professionally is quite a rabbit hole, different than the direction I was headed initially. I mean, I'm completing an MBA at this point to like really learn how to develop culture, which is really what all of this is about. Is culture is that I've heard it defined many ways, but it's that feeling you have, on Sunday night when you're getting ready to go to work on Monday morning. It's like, how do you feel about that, And I really like that definition. I got that from a colleague, and
I love it.
Yeah, and so like when you're feeling, how do you feel about the process of getting into a group and having a discussion? And culture takes a very long time to develop. So another community, I have stuff planned out for a year. Like it's a full year of posted content that's all on calendar, and that's just me posting. And over time, other people will post, and that's it. You have to have continuity, and you have to have a regular, like a flow. Oh, I need to go check that out because they just posted something, and that's kind of interesting. And not everything is going to hit. You have a lot of variety, and then try to build integration. Like what do you think about this? Chime in, and you sort of tag people, kind of thing. So a lot of it is journal club, just review, but also coordination of services happens quite a lot. Hey, I've got somebody in Florida. I need to find somebody to for their discharge or for their coordination of care. They're moving. That happens quite a lot. Continuing education, student questions. I'm interested in getting this area. Where would I do anything from like a rotation while they're in school to a residency after school, or jobs. They're looking for job placement. So it ebbs and flows, that conversation. But the focus group is on Facebook, allows for a sort of an ongoing conversation that there isn't a whole lot of structure to it, which was the downside to Facebook, is that once it's sort of lost to the bottom of the page, it is gone. It's not a resource as much anymore.
Got it. I think that actually will point to, I think, some of the benefits of the APTA community that we'll talk about in a few minutes. Yeah. I just wanted to kind of just touch back again on this. Like, I love, first of all, I love that definition of culture. And I think of that analogy of how you're talking about how that feeling of going to work Monday morning. And at least putting myself in that position, I think about the fact that there's a moment where it's just like you just do it. You get up, you do it, and it's kind of you're committing to that moment. And I think that's very strong. And then this is getting a little sociology here, I feel like, but but I think it's very consistent with what you would want in a community. Is that there has to be some intentionality about it. I think there needs to be a central figure or figures of individuals who are committed to that process and are present as you are and as you have done. I'm wondering, you mentioned, talking about having sort of a year of content kind of pre-scheduled out. You've been doing this for a few years now. How, in terms of sustainability, what does that look like? Do you have ideas for how to bring people into the fold and to kind of help to build that community by kind of putting in these kind of key people?
I have spreadsheets. Yeah. So really early on, we developed a process, and so key people that I've been working with for the last decade. We intentionally developed succession plans. So not, I would say folks would be surprised within APTA how little turnover there is from leadership. Leadership you just roll from one role. You migrate from one role to the next, and that's not sustainable. Maybe you can make it work for a period of time, but you end up you don't get fresh ideas. And biomechanics. I was in the biomechanics special interest group for a number of years, and I worked my way up in the sort of normal progression. You go from like reviewer or something, and then you go nominating committee, and then you go like a secretary, treasurer, kind of maybe treasurer role, and then you go to VP and P, and so or chair, or however they call it, and so that progression helped me to realize that, well, once you do that, like you can roll over a little bit, but you start to burn out. Like you start to have the same ideas, and you're just doing the same thing. And so we keep track. I have I have several, but I have one. So for example, I have one master spreadsheet that back to published, and these are no longer published, but like 2005 or so, I have everybody that's published in this content area at CSM. And so anybody that's presented for, they probably go to APTA with some regularity, and I actually have that all tracked, but those people will be future leadership. They start at some place, and you sort of roll them in and continue to see their service grow.
Yeah, that must be quite an address book. Yeah, I don't often speak about this on the podcast, but for me, I serve in a role in the special interest group under APTA Federal for the amputation care, and very much the same kind of things. Is yes, there is a lot of leadership that kind of stays or kind of goes and alternates from one position to another. Yeah, and that does certainly. That's one of the things that we've had to work through as well, is trying to bring in fresh faces, fresh ideas, and I think. And at least in our scope, we've been very excited to see that, because it's kind of invigorating, even to people who've been doing it for a while. It's invigorating. I'm sure if you see somebody post on the Facebook group, that's probably invigorating. It's like, yes, all right, somebody's like engaged and involved in this. I need to be better about it myself. Full honesty on that one. Yeah, so I could see that. It's just, I think it's a great model to look towards to connect with people through platforms like this, to develop those partnerships and to bring them into the fold of these kinds of things. So that said, the APTA kind of community we mentioned earlier, this is a very kind of new feature. There's really not many of them. I can't remember the last time I counted. It was like 11 groups, I think, total. It's very, very small compared to the many components that are found within APTA and the kind of the different interest areas. Kind of give me give me the lowdown on kind of what an APTA community is in the first place.
So I wish I had that open right now. I think I do someplace. So the communities probably, somebody at APTA said SharePoint is clunky, and let's do like an online community. And I would guess, I'm not going to name, one of the major academies was like, oh yeah, that sounds like a good idea. Rather than us paying for it, why don't you pay for it? And so we had a community, and the communities that there are many communities that the wider community doesn't have access to. So when I look at my community page, it's different than you're facing a community page. So for example, I'm part of the CAPD community page. It's not open to the wider public, right? So they have those, and then I compared it to SharePoint because it has both, like, messaging. There's a discussion board, very similar to like a pinup board, but it's on the like something you pin a message on, and other people could write a response to, and then a file repository. So there's also a calendar attached to it. So it's a pretty basic old school discussion board that is APTA community. And so it was a bit of a process, I'll tell you. Thank you for your help on that, to develop this community. And that was really just trying to migrate to a more legitimate within APTA, is separate from Facebook, because there are many people who just don't have a Facebook account, and that's fine. So to develop a community, you need to really be able to access the population. And so I can get a bunch of them that don't have Facebook, but they are an APTA member. And then there are the people who aren't APTA members, but they have Facebook. I'm certainly still missing some, but to cross post and then have file repositories. But the most important thing that I've always wanted, which was from day one, was to really have an archived, a historical discussion. So when somebody asks, they can search, like, where's the I want to do a clinical specialization in this area. And, they type into the discussion post, and they can see that it's clunky on Facebook. There's going to be many, many different things you're going to see in that. But in the APTA community, what are the current curricular guidelines? I'll tell you, every what is it? It's like a couple weeks before fall and a couple weeks before spring, I get 2 or 3 emails. It's clockwork. I'm teaching this new content area. What do I do? Oh my God. Like, can you send me resources? Yeah. Like, here are all my videos. Here's my syllabus. Here's my everything else. But if that's 5, 6 times a year that I'm writing that same email, I'm like, just go to the community and it's all there, right? So the same link, I don't have to do anything. That makes it, there's like a historical sort of record to things. It makes it very nice.
Yeah, I hear that too, that students, every year you have students that are coming out, they have similar questions, if they want to get involved in the area of practice, similar questions, and answers will kind of be pretty similar, I would expect to see. So I think that's an excellent feature. And I think also, because there's also like a place, like a store, like a library, or like a file library, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
Exactly. Yeah. So it's a very much like something like SharePoint or like yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So that becomes like even a great place for people to be able to publicly provide resources towards each other, furthering that collaboration, which, like you said, on Facebook, you could have it buried 3 years ago. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, absolutely. I'm wondering, so the community platform, so it is kind of specific to APTA members overall. It is publicly available though, and anybody can join, if I'm not mistaken, or is it, or they have to?
How do they join? APTA member.
APTA member, yes.
Sorry. Yeah. So yes, it's available, but you have to be an APTA member. That was actually so APTAs. I mean, again, I like this. It is what it is. But when doing the curricular guidelines, just like when you do a clinical practice guideline, you have to have patient perspective. You have to have the consumer's perspective as well. So when doing curricular guidelines, just like a Delphi or a CPG, you have to have patient perspective. So when I brought this question up, they had to redo their membership. APTA had to redo how they do their volunteer services, because there was no option for somebody who wasn't an APTA member to do that. So now, like, you have to sign up and create an APTA login, but anybody can log in to join up to do the curricular guidelines. And that, I think that's what opened the door actually to APTA's non-APTA membership, which is a whole nother conversation, but it's super interesting. So now we can have, like, prosthetists obtain membership in APTA through individual academies. This is super, super cool and exciting advent potentially for an academy in the future.
Actually, so I don't know. So, like, a prosthetist could join in the APTA.
That's right.
And so they could be
individual academy. It's a non-APTA membership.
Yes. Okay.
It's a non-PT APTA membership. Yeah.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, I'm just kind of wondering, in an ideal world,
yeah,
what does the community look like? What do the postings look like?
So I think it would fit across sort of maybe 3 or 4 categories, where you have educational, an educators area, a research area, and integration and community for individuals, wanting to teach or wanting to get different access to different sort of niche areas of the population. You're just interested in children, in congenital or limb difference, and so access can be quite challenging. But if you had a multi-site study, that would be really advantageous, and something that community could build those interrelationships. Of course, clinical service, being able to triangulate or support individuals' care in different areas. You talked about how service might be different in Florida versus Colorado. Well, scope of practice is actually different between those 2 states. That's in the curricular guideline, but most people, you wouldn't know. Oh, hey, I can fabricate a socket and legally in my scope in this place. Versus and then finally, it would be Con Ed, like CEUs. Hey, I just did this really cool Con Ed thing at Mission Gate or at CSM, and you can continue watching it here or there. And that would be, I think, the 4 main areas.
Awesome. All right. So let's say somebody's listening to this and they maybe kind of feel a little bit disconnected from the community. What would you recommend them to go and kind of get into first?
So I'd ask them 2 questions. These are the 2 questions I ask for really folks that are teaching, folks that are doing research, folks that are or just starting out. What's your population? First, if your population is VA DoD, like, the federal SIG is the place where you should be. Like, that makes a lot of sense. If you're producing content at CSM, like, go that way. If you integrate into those services, the federal SIG Facebook page, the acute Facebook page is going to be sort of tangentially related. Maybe if you're on Facebook, that could be a thing. If you're an APTA member is the second question. And so APTA community would be another resource for you. For folks that aren't VA DoD, if you're in a broader area, I'd say that the acute focus group is by design less specific. It is more general. So that would be a great place for you to access, ask questions. That's really what I would encourage either any of those groups is just if you want to be part of the community, you gotta sit next to the water cooler and start speaking up. So talk and tell us what you need. And that has been a really exciting and new role for me. New in the last decade is that I don't know the answer to most questions, but I know somebody who does, right? So most of the time, I was on a meeting yesterday and they said, "Hey, I want to do this thing." And I'm like, "I am not the person for you." And I say that a lot. I am not that person, but I know a couple of people who I can ask and they might be able to help you out. But with the people I'm meeting with don't know the people that I know all the time. And so it's like, it's a bit of I've developed a bit of a finger on the pulse. And so I can help get you the resources you need.
That's the power of community.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. But it's not just me. Like, you can post stuff in there and other people will see it and post. And so over time it has really developed.
Yeah. I'm curious, as far as you're working on this MBA, kind of looking at sort of these culture elements. Sorry, yeah. Diving into it. No, yeah. Are there any resources that you would say that you've come across, or different organizations that you've reflected on that you're like, I really like this thing, and this is kind of impacts what I'm doing right now?
There's so much. And I'm a little embarrassed. I got to say, I don't know why I said that MBA thing. Not to say that it's secret. I'm a little embarrassed to still be in school. Not as a bad thing, but I don't want to have anybody have an assumption that I'm doing something with this MBA. I was just curious. Yeah. Honestly, I was like, oh, this is neat. I did the APTA Leadership Fellowship, and I was like, wow, that's cool. This is just neat, sort of developmental processes. I think we read 40 books over that year-long fellowship. Oh, and then, however many books. I've just got stacks of books that I read. I mean, this Covey's The Speed of Trust is so good. Just really getting at how to both for rapport with a patient, but also just the idea of and really anything. Some of the basic negotiation textbooks are really cool. Just getting into how the course I finished last semester was on sort of behavior and negotiation, and that so many of those homework assignments I worked on with my wife. But also with students. And so I would say if you could try to take a class in some negotiations, or read Covey, he has 2 or 3 books that are very, very applied. Hey, if you want, reach out to me. If your listeners, or reach out to me on my email or Facebook or whatever, and I'll send you a list of all of the books that we read from an Amazon whatever wish list, book wish list. There's so many cool books. I'm doing the MBA. The focus is in business analytics and healthcare. So a lot of it is some of the analytic components. Marketing, super cool. That's a really cool concept. And really, you mentioned selling an idea. Science is 100% marketing. I've done really, really bad posters at national conferences, and ones that I was like, wow, this looks terrible. But it was an excellent marketing tool. It has very little to do with actually, the science. It's mostly just a movie. It's a giant advertisement for an idea, and I think that's a hard thing to both learn as well as grapple with. Once you oh man, this is not the science that I had in mind. This is all just selling an idea.
Yeah, I think you do an excellent job of bringing so many pieces together, and I think it's I think sometimes there can be a misconception that, folks, if they're trying to learn something, that all has to be in one particular content area. But I think that's, and this could go in a whole nother direction. But the idea of like some like colleges, like their general education kind of stuff, there's a purpose behind it, that you're trying to bring in different skills that, maybe a clinician who just wants to be involved for their patients, who wants to better themselves for their patients, reading a book on negotiations could help them in that process. The fact that there's that consideration. And I think you've kind of displayed like an excellent role, like kind of role modeling essentially how diving into these topics can benefit not only just your own understanding of how you interact with the people, how you can build a community, but setting yourself up to now have an address book that you can connect with somebody to be able to answer the question that you don't know the answer to, and knowing that you don't know the answer to. So I think it's fantastic. All right, last question I got for you. This is kind of how I like to wrap up things. Kind of the central idea of this communities, these online communities. Do you have sort of an example of like an experience or like kind of a contact that you've made through either the focus group or for a Facebook group or any of those kinds of things that has kind of led to, kind of like a real meaningful project? And we've kind of pretty heavily covered the curricular guidelines, but is there any kind of other like partnership that's kind of come out of that sort of community?
Okay, yeah, and this just came to me, so I hope this works, because I read that question and I was like, woo, I'm not sure, because not really any single one, but I hope this one shows how one interaction can just lead to a decade of progression. So for a year I don't remember what day of the week, I think I have an alarm set for it, just like I did this open Zoom. I think this was during COVID. I did just an hour or two a week, where I had an open office time for this group, and people would pop in and come and go, and for a number of I'm going to say months, somebody came in, and they were from Florida, and they were in a major healthcare system, and their standard of care was either no bandaging or wet to dry. And so that led to, wow, well, there's no real changing that. Like, you can't just say, hey, I'm going to write a note and then all of a sudden everything's going to be better. But you can provide education to try to fix that at the time. That's the short term. That's like that's the Hail Mary. Like, we're going to try to change things. It's not going to happen, right? So really, I'm most of the time, I think like 50 years down the line. That's just where my brain is, I guess. But I said, okay, well, let's develop curricular guidelines to help change things at the student level, and then by the time they get there, they'll look at you and they'll be like, "What? We don't do that anymore. Like, that's not a thing." And so practice will change over time. So that curricular guideline then led into so there's like community service, right? And then education. We did 2 or 3. We did a pre-con, and then we did several education sessions at CSM to sort of change the bar. And then the third category would be research. And so got funding for I'm really proud of that project. It was a very small project, but it was just something that I was like, wow, this would be super neat to get a bunch of my friends together and do a research project on this. And so we did I got a geographer to do GIS, and they mapped the US using the zip code tabulations, which I didn't know what it was at the time. And then we mapped all the prosthetists across the US to try to see where there are prosthetic deserts, if you will. Like, where do people not get an adequate service?
That sounds like an immense project.
It was huge. It was super fun, right? And so So we found where there was adequate service and where there was not, and that was based off of established models. It was, there was like food deserts was a thing, people really described pretty well, and then emergency department deserts, and I was like, well, let's do prosthetist deserts. It would be really interesting to do it with PTs and people with specialization, but I don't have access to those data. So cool. And then that, like, okay, so now we've mapped where there are deserts, but do people actually have different outcomes? So we revisited that program, that whole project, and are now redoing it with qualitative data and interviewing people with high access areas to low access areas, and seeing what's different about those people. Do they have different outcomes? Do they have different sort of equipment, different services? How are they driving 2 to 3 hours each way, like many of my patients do? And why? Like, why do they do that? So everything from education to clinical service, professional service, like all of those things really kind of led from that one conversation. I was like, wow, that's a I had no idea this was such a, that's not good. Like, you can't, how do you not bandage an individual after you do, a transfemoral amputation? That just seems wrong. Like, so that's, I guess, one anecdote.
That sounds great. Yeah, I think it brings the power of community home. Every time I interview somebody, I ask them these kind of questions of, how did you get involved into this? How did you get into this area? And it's usually a connection somewhere. They've met somebody, oh, this person was doing this kind of work. I got to meet them, and then they brought me into the fold. And then, kind of in the same way with you, it kind of led down this whole pathway of like all these new and exciting things. So yeah, thanks for sharing that. So yeah, with that, Toran MacLeod, thanks for being here.
Thanks, Will.